Good morning, folks. Simon Redfern here. Can you see me? Excuse me. Can you hear me? Please type something on the chat. Cool. Great. Please excuse me. I've got a bit of a cold. Greetings from Berlin. A lovely sunny day today. It'll be good to know where everyone is from, actually. Just have a few hellos from people. If you can say which city you're in or where you are. And maybe if you could just say on the chat, roughly what your interest is, whether you're a developer, whether you're working for a bank, whether you're a consultant or so. That would also be good. Let me just arrange my screen a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce myself and some of the other people on the line. Then I'm going to take you through an intro to Open Bank project and dive into some of the PSD2 topics. Probably most of you have got the report that we have made available. Perhaps Eleanor or someone could put the link on the chat in case not. And then I'll show a bit of REST client action and show some of the the API Explorer and so on and so forth. Eleanor, maybe you can put the link to the actual report. All right, so cool. We've got someone from Bangalore, London, Munich. Greetings, Patrick in Munich. Greetings, Mustafa in London. Greetings, Vikram. Oliver in Frankfurt. Nice. All right, so also on the chat are some of the my TSOBI colleagues. We've got Eleanor, Manuel, Ava, Luca, Torsten. I'm not quite sure if we've got anyone else. Sorry if I missed anyone's name. All right, so then let me share my screen. And let's see. Yeah, you might get a little echo while I switch. All right. And members of the TSOBI team, please ping me on WhatsApp if something goes wrong. Yeah, if you can't see me. I've turned my phone on, so if something goes wrong, I should get a bleep if you WhatsApp me. All right, so greetings. I'm Simon Redfern. I'm founder of the Open Bank project and CEO of TSOBI. Thanks very much for joining, everyone. Excuse me. So we've got probably quite a range of people on the line. So there'll be, I will probably jump around a bit. Please excuse me. And if you've got any deeper questions or any other questions, then please put them on the chat, and my colleagues will try and answer them. Drop us an email, contact@tsobi.com. Eleanor can help you with that if you've got any other like commercial support questions also. All right, so open banking, we've come a long way in the last few years. It's worth noting, where we came from, really. So for me, open banking, we started it in 2010, and it really came out of two kind of parallel wishes, really. One was to have better interfaces for onto bank accounts. So personally, I thought the interface to my personal bank account and my business bank account at the time just sucked. Yeah, I just thought it was, like in the dark ages. And at the same time, I was interested in greater transparency to target corruption and fraud, and I think that's still a relevant thing, and hopefully, PSD2 and greater APIs will lead to further transparency in the end. I think that would be good for society and everyone in general. So those are the two routes of open banking as far as we're concerned. And what are the, we like to say there are several O's in this open banking. So, excuse me, open APIs for every bank. Open standards, so based on open standards, so building on open standards, and an open bank project, of course, is producing open standards, and we not only build on open source, but we produce open source technology. Yeah, and I think open data is part of open banking as well. If you just look at like product information and branches and ATMs, that kind of stuff. And, this leads to open innovation, yeah? And, I mean, open banking is totally building on the shoulders of previous giants in a sense, right? So it's looking at concepts, as used by Wikipedia. Obviously, the reason that HTTP is so successful is that it's open standard, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to leverage those approaches, really. Yeah? So looking at open data, open source, et cetera, et cetera. And when I started talking about open banking in 2010, and people are saying, well, yeah, why do we need that? But if we look back at 1995, people were saying, well, why does my company need a website? Yeah. And now, of course, everyone has a website and far more besides. And this is where we're going with APIs in banking, and the reasons are multifold, really. But there are good technical reasons. It's good to separate systems using interfaces, and when we have like standard interfaces, that makes it all the more easy, and we want to encourage startups and other businesses to connect to banks, and customers want this so they have better choice. And to do that, we want to make the interfaces as simple to use and as as standard as possible. So I'm also a musician composer sometimes, and I sometimes use the example of like these patch chords that you plug synthesizers together, or even if you look at MIDI, like which you plug synthesizers together, and the reason that worked and the reasons that other standards work is just because they are, they're simple and ubiquitous and so on. So, and in this whole like PSD2 process, so the EU deliberately didn't say how banks must have an interface, but they really said, well, what the general principles should be. And I think the interfaces that will kind of survive and win in the end will be, the simplest ones, probably in the end. Okay, and why is open banking? Why is it important now? Well, customers are continually, changing their behavior. So when I started this, I used to talk about my nieces, who were kind of young teenagers at the time, and they would be on their their phones and so on more and more. And now I can actually talk about my children, you know, so it's gone on a few years now, you know, but instead of talking about WhatsApp, they're joking about Siri, you know, is better than Alexa. And so they're joking, you know, with one AI system about another AI system, you know. And I think, you know, AI is, you know, is going to come, you know, more and more into banking. You know, we're seeing that with some of the applications that are connecting to Open Bank Project. I mean, big IT systems at the back are, you know, they're probably no faster than they were a few years ago in terms of changing and so on. Obviously, there's been lots of updating going on recently. But you know, API systems at the front, they can move faster than the API than the backend systems. Yeah. So that you can see the API layer as a kind of slippery surface, a bit more slippery than the core banking system, which is, you know, for good reasons, has to move very slowly. And then the apps on top are moving faster still. So it's like a kind of slippery surface that moves faster the further you get out. Yeah. And okay, and what about competitors, and why is this so important for open banking? Well, because the banks are up against a kind of double problem in a way, in that consumers are much more confident to try offerings from the likes of Google and Apple and Facebook and so on. They're just more happy to try new things, and at the same time, you know, they'd rather go to the dentist than speak to their bank, and at the same time, the banks are well, the Google and Facebook and so on, they obviously understand platforms very, very well. Yeah, and you know, last but not least, regulation is now kicking off, and it's obviously it's not just a European thing. So we're seeing Australia, Mexico, et cetera, bringing out their own regulation. And so this is driving open banking in a way that was not thought of, you know, like 8 to 9 years ago or so. So what is Open Bank Project? So we produce open standard APIs. We also implement other standards, so Berlin Group, STET, UK. Excuse me. And we produce open source technology that surfaces all these APIs. So we see Open Bank Project as an enabler of multiple standards. And obviously, like open banking, so PSD2 is a kind of subset of open banking, and Open Bank Project is a superset of some of the open banking that's out there. So for instance, yeah, like the UK standard has some PSD2 things, but also open banking things as well. And thirdly, Open Bank Project is a large developer community. So over 10,000 developers have connected to our sandboxes and so on, and they produce apps and services that they want to connect to banks, as fintech solutions. And okay, so the mile high view of Open Bank Project is that Open Bank Project is an API layer which sits on top of the core banking system. And from day one, we built this connector layer inside, because we knew we wanted to connect to different core banking systems. And of course, we want the interface, the front end interfaces to be standard, so that a developer shouldn't know whether they're connecting to some, you know, really old mainframe system or a more modern core banking system. The vendor of the core banking system should be completely transparent and well, actually, yeah, should be kind of invisible to the application developer. yeah, so that's in a nutshell what we do. We provide developer-friendly APIs of different standards to developers who want to connect their apps to banks. And the developer community has changed and developed over the years itself. So here we have a few examples. So personal finance management apps, apps for youth, business analytics, chatbots, so AI type chatbots. We even did an app, ages ago called the Singing Bank, which was like a publicity stunt, really, but it just made music out of bank account transactions, just showing that unusual apps emerge when you have APIs. So hopefully this is going to invigorate the banking landscape. And I would say that one of the driving factors of Open Bank project is really to democratize the technology in and around banks. So we provide enterprise grade technology for for banks around the world. We want to make it easier for new banks to be started, and for everyone to have access to first-rate, super good technology. So the RESTful, so the API platform is RESTful. So maybe everyone knows what that's about, but basically, I like to explain it in the way that it's good for humans to read. So everything's a URL. We took some decisions early on about versioning in the URL because it's kind of easy to see. And when I was on the first meetings of the UK Open Banking Working Group, there were discussions. Some people said, "Oh, we should use SOAP," and some people said, "Oh, well, we should invent something new other than REST." And I was very, clear that we should use REST. It's an excellent kind of style of defining endpoints. We put so we put versioning in the URL, sort parameters as well, actually, and we made some decisions about just having things like account ID as a UUID, so that things that go in URLs shouldn't be like sensitive information like account numbers, because they are going to get cached around the infrastructure of the internet. At the same time, we decided on JSON. Very easy to read as a human, and also there's basically there are gazillions of libraries to read and write JSON. Yeah, even like there is music software packages which will read and write JSON. Sometimes I do a demo, like showing a Moog synthesizer making a payment over Open Bank project, just to show that it's ubiquitous. REST and HTTP libraries and JSON is ubiquitous. So a little bit about the API catalog. So we started with this accounts and transactions, basically the heart of PSD2. And very quickly, developers asked us to add payments and so on. So the other half of the heart of PSD2. At the same time, we added APIs for branches, ATMs, and products. So this is like the open data from the bank's perspective. So it's data that kind of probably is in the public domain anyway, but by making it properly open, we formalize that so that people can use it without fear of violating copyright and that kind of stuff. And the Open Bank project products APIs are quite involved. We have product catalogs and nested structures, so product attributes and so on and so forth. So you can build and represent quite sophisticated product portfolios and so on using the Open Bank products APIs. Then we have APIs around counterparties and transactions and adding metadata to that. So, imagine the third party wants to tag or categorize transactions and counterparties. So there's one choice, of course, is just to put that in the app. But then, that potentially sensitive data is being stored outside of the bank's infrastructure, and also other apps won't have access to that data. Yeah, the banks generally don't want to store metadata within their mainframe, and so that's where Open Bank Project comes in, and our technology is able to combine the metadata with the data from the core banking system. Then we have many APIs for like onboarding and KYC, and APIs for cards. And then there are APIs for managing the APIs themselves, so roles and metrics, so which APIs are being used, and of course APIs for documentation. So we surface all the documentation from Open Bank Project in real time over APIs. And then of course there are APIs for consent management and so on, which I will get onto a bit more. So this slide is a bit out of date. We have now over 200 APIs. I think it's 220 APIs, plus the APIs from UK, Berlin Group and STET, which are, some of them are, more or less connected. Then we have APIs for searching data warehouses and so on and so forth. So sometimes banks want to expose larger volumes of data for data warehouse applications, and we do that as well. So the Open Bank Project technology itself is all open source. It's on GitHub, and it's all white labelable for the bank. So here's a landing page of so this Citizens Bank is a large regional bank in the East Coast in the USA, in Boston, out of Boston. This is so one of the first kind of landing spaces that the developers come to really is API Explorer, and this is another part of Open Bank Project. This is where the developers can read the documentation and choose which APIs they need to use. All this documentation comes from the Open Bank Project system. So the developers, we are all editing this API documentation, and when you're using this app, you're logging in via OAuth, in a process which is similar to other apps which will consume the API. Another part of Open Bank Project is API Manager. So this is where you can see the bank, or the people managing the APIs for the bank can see which APIs are being used, which consumers or apps are being have access to the APIs, and so on. The users, what the users can do, and so on and so forth. So this is actually a Django web application. The rest of Open Bank Project is written in Scala. This is written in Python. Then we have developer tools like SDKs, so software development kits, ranging from quite simple scripts to more involved and complete kind of SDKs, such as the iOS SDKs. They help developers get started with the OAuth flows, and they are licensed under MIT BSD Apache style licenses. When we're using a sandbox, we provide sandbox data for the developers, easy to get started, to try the auth flows and so on and so forth. And developers and banks like this this data because it doesn't come from core banking system. And you know, the thing about Open Bank Project Sandbox is that it's really that everything in Open Bank Project can be persisted in our databases, and there are proper relationships between all the entities and so on. So it's like a kind of mini core banking system, so it's not like mocked services or anything like that. So yeah, let me talk a little bit about consent. So I mean, consents is quite a big topic, obviously in PSD2, and in Open Bank Project, we from the very beginning we've had something called views on accounts. So this is where the bank or the account holder can define a view on their account. For instance, we can have a fine-grained access to accounts and transactions. So, for instance, we can have a view which only shows the date and the amount of each transaction, and we can have a view which allows certain types of payments, say from their own accounts to another owned account, another view which allows any type of payment, and so on. So this is the building block that we have used for kind of giving consent for apps to access the APIs, and that's So this was within Open Bank Project since the pretty much the first commits back in 2011, and it's a pretty flexible scheme that we have. So we have APIs for modifying these views, and there are and they are the things that allow access to the accounts on Open Bank Project. If there is not a view on the account, then basically all but one of the endpoints just will not give any data. So there's also we have APIs for metadata, as I mentioned earlier, and we have an application called SOFIT, which is can read and write this data. So just you can check out some proof of concept there by adding tags or comments to transactions and so on and so forth. And if you're an application developer that's interested in that. So I'm going to show a more detailed slide in a minute about access control and consents in terms of PSD2, but this is like a kind of mile-high view, basically. So the application at the top, first it's checking whether the API is enabled, because Open Bank Project has many potential APIs, of course, and some are enabled and disabled for a particular Open Bank Project instance. And this is also this is one way that we can provision different APIs from to roll out different APIs. They can be configured in something we call the props file, which can be loaded per instance. So we're checking whether the API is enabled. We're checking whether the consumer is enabled, or the app, whether the scope is enabled for the bank and the app, and then we are checking views, consents, and then we are and another path is to check a role. So roles are non-PSD2 APIs, and consents and views are for PSD2 related APIs. So basically APIs which are accessing a specific customer's data. Yeah, and only then do we return the resource to the consumer. All right, something kind of high up view again of OBP interfaces. So in the middle we have the core Open Bank Project API. Obviously the primary and the first interfaces are inbound HTTP REST calls. So these are going to be made by our own tools and third-party applications and services. But going off to the side, to the left, we also have this outbound HTTP via webhooks. So this is a feature that was requested by some developers some time ago, actually. So here the idea is that if there's an event which changes on your account or your balance, then you can define a webhook which will call out to an external service. So this is to prevent the need for apps to continually poll the API for a certain event. So say the balance changes on an account, the app might want to be notified of that. So if money comes in from the outside world, or if another app is making a payment and so on, then OBP will know this, and we can call an external service. And this is the webhooks are defined by the account holder, in fact. So so that's a useful integration point. And then on the south side, we have our connector layer, which is talking different protocols to the south side, the core banking system. So either via Kafka. So Kafka is a distributed log from the Apache Foundation. Akka is for sending messages within the JVM, or to another JVM. So you might have a Java processes running somewhere which can listen to Akka and Akka stream, and of course HTTP. So if there are internal APIs already, then we can call out to those HTTP services. And we have we produce something called message docs, which basically lists these processes and the message structures, basically. And I'll show you that in a bit. And we have Swagger for the internal south-facing HTTP services as well. So we can define the what we want to see on the south side to make the connection really easily. And then we have obviously the core banking system that's there in the purple, and then we have Open Bank Project data, which is stored, which we interface to via JDBC. So that's an overview of the interfaces. Now, in terms of Open Bank Project itself, so the central bit, this is all core API, excuse me, Open Bank Project, so this is the core banking adapter. Looks a little bit small there, but this is can actually be microservices here. So when we send messages to Kafka or Akka, we can have multiple adapters which listen to the different messages coming from Open Bank project, and they respond. It's all good, non-blocking. We can have direct connectors as well, which talk to the core banking system. Yeah, the authentication is done via OAuth, so we support OAuth 1.0a, OAuth 2 with OpenID Connect. We support like external OAuth servers such as Mitra ID, and also servers in the cloud such as Google and so on. Yeah, an Open Bank project has facilities for caching and so on, so we're using Redis, and we can separate the instances of Open Bank project to provide load balancing and so on and so forth. The infrastructure is secured with two-way SSL, and there are plenty of configuration options for encrypting passwords and storing keys separately, and so on and so forth. Okay, then coming to the end of the bit about Open Bank project in general, but yeah, deployment is obviously important, so all source code is on GitHub. You can obviously run on the bare metal using Maven or so on, or run in your local development environment using IntelliJ or so. And we provide the Docker images, and recently we have Open Bank project running on Kubernetes. So we have a partnership with Red Hat on that, and yeah, so you can run Open Bank project there as well. So all good deployment options. In terms of the backend connectivity, we have written like Java and Scala adapters, but also you can use but basically any language south of the Kafka queue. So that's one of the advantages of using Kafka, that if you're a C# shop, you can write .NET and so on. It doesn't have to be JVM language. And also we can use tools such as Fuse, which will consume the Kafka or Akka messages as well. All right, so that's let me just have a look at how the questions coming on. Okay. Oh, so there's a question here. Can we have custom authentication in addition to OAuth? So yeah, Vikram, that's a yes. So we provide something called gateway login, which will really enable you to do whichever authentication you want, and then you pass the token to us to authenticate the client. So let me show you something about the API Explorer, and part of that is the glossary. So this is the API Explorer. This is one of the public ones. Actually, it's the one that we use for demos and stuff. The kind of main public one is either here at API Sandbox, or here we have PSD2 one. But anyway, let me just, so if you go into the glossary, you'll see down here we have a list of topics which are of general interest. So we have, for instance, gateway login here. So excuse the diagram, it's a bit not scaled very well. But basically, you create and sign a JWT, a JOT for us, and we have to enable the Open Bank project instance to accept the provider of this JOT as authorized and so on. So we swap. We have two-way auth there, and we have we lock it down to the IP address and so on and so forth. And then you can have basically any authentication scheme you have just pass through the REST calls to Open Bank project, and we will extract the username and other tokens out of this JOT, and then and use that and pass that on to the core banking system. So yeah, that's totally possible. Also, we can, as I mentioned, we can integrate like Mitra ID also to have other authentication flows. All right, let me just go back to the API Explorer. So this is where the developers are going to architect their app and also find out about different APIs. So by default, we list the 200 or more Open Bank project APIs. Then we have a catalog which is just related to PSD2. So these are still Open Bank project APIs, but just focused around. It's basically a filter on Open Bank project APIs, just filtered around APIs that are useful for PSD2. Then we have Berlin Group and UK and STET as well. Like in the Sandbox, many of these are not enabled, but some of them are. We put this message if it's not enabled. But there are a good few which are enabled, which just basically get the same data, but in the Berlin Group or UK or STED format, basically. So let me just show you the the API manager. So this is the tool that I mentioned before. So the Django Python app. We can see that all the consumers. We can see, which rate limiting they have so we support rate limiting and throttling. We can see which users are on the platform. I can see my own user, which roles I have, and so on and so forth. And then we have like metrics, so which APIs are being used. And Open Bank project can be standalone as the gateway, or it can sit behind like a purpose built gateway. And then we sit behind that, so we can combine the Open Bank project technology with external gateway, no problem. So let me take you, I want to show you another diagram, and then I will jump back to the API Explorer in a second. So this diagram here is focusing on the auth flows within PSD2. So it's maybe a bit small for everyone to see, but I'll go through it and explain roughly what's going on. So on the left-hand side, we have the TPP, which will have one or more apps under their control, and within that there are different processes. So there is like the user registration, and then like when they come back, each session that they're interacting with the APIs. And on the OBP side, we have the TPP registration, the API app identification, and the discovery of the banks which are on this instance. Yeah, and then we have further TPP identification and something we call the introduction, which is like when the customer is introduced to the app and into the account. So this is basically like saying getting the consent from the customer that it's okay that this app is going to use is going to access the data of such and such an account. Excuse me. And then there are, if we go up further on down, then there are flows for exactly which account, and then and payment initiation or confirmation of funds. And on the right we have the fraud and so on part of monitoring part of PSD2. So I mean, probably you have everyone's had a look at the focus on action document. So this was quite obviously quite a bit of work over. I mean, we produced the first version a year or two ago, I suppose. But obviously at the back there, in the appendix, there's a list of all the articles and with notes on how Open Bank project supports them. Obviously lots and lots of detail. But if we step through this diagram, we can see, how the consents are built up. PSD2 stipulates that there must be mutual TLS between the app and the API. For instance, I showed the gateway login. So this is one way that we support that currently on OBP. And there are different types of SCA. So SCA standing for strong customer authentication. So we have like the identification, like the client saying, this is me. And then we have the authentication. So these are marked with an A in this diagram. So this is like proving that it's really the customer, and then like confirmation of consent. So, for instance, to make a payment and so on. So there are different types of SCA for different purposes. Shown in this diagram. So if I, we only have 7 minutes left, which is pretty quick. But if I go back to the API Explorer, I'll just highlight a couple of the excuse me, a couple of the endpoints that are useful for that. So, for instance, we have here create a consent. Yeah, this is a way that an authenticated user can create a consent on one or more of their accounts. Yeah, and they create the consent is created in an initiated state, but obviously it needs to be confirmed, and this is where SCA comes in. So excuse me. So a one-time password is sent via the SCA channel, which is typically an SMS or so. So like SMS sent to your phone, excuse me, with an answer to a security challenge, and then this endpoint here is used to answer that. So we have a similar process in place for making transactions. So they are transaction requests in Open Bank Project, and they need to be confirmed via SCA using this endpoint here. So consents are a way to provide a token, basically, which gives the holder of that token potentially also with along with other authorization headers to give access to a certain resource. Yeah? A user can see which consents they have granted using this endpoint, and revoke certain consents using this endpoint. Something a little bit about onboarding and so on. So in Open Bank Project, we have something called an auth context. So related to a user. So in Open Bank Project terms, anyone can create a user. It's just like registering, yeah. But who does that user really belong to? I mean, who is it in terms of the bank? Yeah. So I mean, obviously, Fred Blogs can come along and register, but we want to assign that user to a specific customer at the bank, and we do that with something called the user auth context. This endpoint here can be used for that, and this endpoint can be used to update the auth context, but the update only succeeds if the SCA is successful. Yeah. So typically the bank would send an SMS. So when this update endpoint is called, Open Bank Project would send a message to the bank, and the bank or Open Bank Project would like confirm the customer number, get a phone number associated with that customer number, and then send a one-time password to the customer, and then the customer has to put the value back on the API channel to confirm it, and only then is the user auth context is updated, and then we know that user is associated with the customer. So that's one of the ways that we do the onboarding part of the introduction journey, basically. So and then SCA is like is playing an important role in this journey, because basically the internet is an untrusted place, obviously. So we have to prove that it's that person, and then we have to prove that they have given consent. And in terms of PSD2, it's very important that all this information is logged in a kind of in a very persistent way. Excuse me, and that's why we recommend that the use of the Kafka interface of the core banking system, because it's impossible basically for Open Bank Project to send an instruction to the core banking system without the message being logged and so on. So I'm aware that we are coming to the end of our webinar. Are there any questions that are here on the line? Valentine, yeah, we'll be able to send the presentation to you. Please, drop an email. Oh, that's my kind of cuckoo clock, which is making funny sounds. Please drop an email to contact@tasobi.com. Let me just put it here. Contact@tasobi.com. Yeah, and we can send you the presentation. Most welcome, Matty. Yeah, so thanks for joining, folks. We're here to help if you need any assistance with your PSD2 and beyond open banking requirements. We're here to help. Yeah. I guess you're probably signed up with our newsletter, and you can also get some. You can interact with us over at Slack. If you go to this, where are we? Oops, oh, put it twice. And Eleanor put it there too. Okay. All right, cool. Thanks very much, people. I see we have 81 people around. It's nice. Speak soon, and thanks a lot. Ciao, ciao. Bye.